Welcome back. For centuries, China has held together a geographically vast, multicultural and multi-ethnic nation, but the Uyghur and Han Chinese riots of this week violently brought to the surface a simmering tension in the country. To discuss the issue, we have Nuri Tukel, a Uyghur-American attorney. He's also co-founder of the Uyghur Human Rights Project. And also Walter Lerman, director of the Heritage Foundation's Asian Studies Center. He's worked extensively in Asia, serving as the executive director of the US ASEAN Business Council. Now, before we get to our discussion, here's the result of our chatroom poll. Before the break, we asked, is control of natural resources in Xinjiang province a key reason for the conflict between the Han Chinese and Uyghur minority in the region? Well, 77% of you said yes, while 23% of you said no. Of course, remember, you have to remember this poll is not scientific, but simply the opinion of some of our viewers around the world. As we get back to questions, we've got a caller on the line. Fahim is on the line from the UK. Fahim, what would you like to ask?
Hi, I've got a comment on Nuri's statement. He said the freedom for the Muslims in China has gone towards worse. I think he's not seeing the reality. I've been to China last year. I stayed there for 2 months, and I've seen mosques in China. Muslims are going there. Muslims from all around the world, they are doing business. So they've got greater freedom. The next freedom is they have, like, other normal Chinese would have 1 or 2 children. And I've seen the Chinese, they are being penalized for the second child. But the Muslim Chinese, they have got even 4 or 5 children. They're coming, they've got restaurants, they're doing business.
Okay.
And they're enjoying the greater...
Fahim, let me ask you...
Sorry.
Go on.
Sorry, the question is why the rest of the world is moving towards, regionalization or making, groups of countries. Why the Uyghurs are, going towards separatism? They are going against the flow, like Europe, like in America, like in Africa. The other countries are trying to get together and make like a regional.
All right, Fahim, I'm going to ask Nuri to address that then.
I appreciate that comment and question. First of all, it is true, in the 80s, during the Hu Yaobang's presidency, the Chinese government allowed lots of mosques to be built. And the question now becomes, yes, you have that infrastructure. Now, do the people have a right to go in there and practice? That's the fundamental question. And another issue that must be addressed is the Chinese government's religious policy towards the Uyghurs are much, much harsh than the Hui Muslims per se. Because the Chinese government believes that Uyghurs' religious identity is a feeding tube to Uyghurs' national identity. That is translated into separatistic tendencies in the waves of the Chinese government.
Is that because of Turkic origins?
Turkic origin, Islamic values, and long history of being politically aware of the situation in the region. To answer the second part of the question about the separatism, the Uyghur people have tried to live within the system. My colleague here mentioned Ms. Kadir. She is a typical example. She made millions and become a very powerful individual within the Chinese system, tried to live within the system, tried to promote the cultural rights of the Uyghur people, and the Chinese government view her as an enemy instead of as part of the solution. A lot of Uyghurs tried that, and also we don't have a good example. Look at the Dalai Lama. He even offered to live within the communist system, and the Chinese government is not taking him seriously. So in order for Uyghurs to believe that they can better off in China, one, the Chinese government needs to show a goodwill, that they be treated just like anybody else. B, there should be an example elsewhere that they can follow. There's nothing that makes the Uyghurs to believe they are better off in China. So a lot of people looking the independence or separatism as a way to solve their ethnic issues.
On that issue of the separatism taking place in China, Fahim's question, Walter, if I could put this to you, it's coming from our chat room, and David in the US here is in the live station chat room, says, is it possible that China would be a federation of semi-independent states in the future as more and more ethnic and religious groups seek autonomy?
I think not a chance. They've tried that once and it devolved into warlordism, so I don't think that's really a realistic possibility.
How do you assess the way the US has been relatively quiet on this? I mean, it seems very selective in its condemnation of what's going on where.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. I think less being selective than that they have not decided that they are going to elevate issues of human rights on their foreign policy agenda. I mean, it's hard not to see it that way. When Hillary Clinton went to China earlier this year, she even said something to the effect that, well, we can't allow these human rights issues to get in the way. And I think she's making a terrible mistake. They have to be high on the agenda. You can raise these issues with the Chinese, and they're not going to scuttle the whole thing. You can raise these, and if we don't raise it, who's going to raise it?
Is it fear of the economic power of China? Is that what it is?
You know, it's hard to know. I mean, if that's the case, I think they have a fundamental misreading of the economic situation. The Chinese depend on us as much as we depend on them, and they buy our bonds because they're good investments, and they're not going to stop buying them until they become bad investments.
Nuri, we had a question from our chat room, live station chat room, from Marston in the USA as well, who says, how does the recent release of Uyghur prisoners from Gitmo, from Guantanamo Bay, affect America's stance towards the Uyghur plight?
The American government's handling, particularly politicians and the conservative part of the political spectrum, has been largely disappointing because they effectively blocked the Uyghurs' release into the United States, some of them even equating them with some radical and extreme people, which is false. Even our courts, federal courts, even the Bush administration have cleared that for us already. So there's a big mistake in the U.S. government's part, not even bringing some of them in here. That could have sent some positive message to the Uyghurs back home that the Uyghurs not alone. But the mistake has already been done, but we expect the U.S. government handle the rest of the 13 Uyghurs release appropriately. And I'd like to add one point to Walter's earlier comment about the U.S. response, which has been largely disappointing. We've been hearing, the Uyghur Americans and the worldwide Uyghur community have been hearing in previous administration, current administration, so long as you peacefully demand your rights, we're with you. The Uyghurs haven't seen that. The Uyghurs simply begging for the type of support that the Iranians on the streets not too long ago asked for the United States, others to show. And it has been largely disappointing. Only one government, the Turkish government, have shown very strong sympathy.
That's been an interesting
plausible
thing, yeah. The Turkey has been one of the few countries, or pretty much the only country that's spoken up. And in fact, it's a question that came from Facebook, from our Facebook site, from Lilia Patterson, a regular viewer who wrote in, Walter, if you could address this, is China's copying the West using Islamic groups in order to target people and deny them human rights as citizens of China, I guess, regardless of religious persuasion. So, you know, what bearing do you feel that the whole Muslim factor has on this, and how much of an excuse is it?
Well, it is principally an excuse. I mean, this doesn't really have anything to do with religion, and that's why I think you see the Turks coming out about it before anyone else, or more loudly than anyone else, because it's an ethnic issue. It's not a religious issue. The Chinese are trying to plug into something that they think will sell in the West and the United States in particular. If I could just clarify one point that Nuri made, I think being from the Heritage Foundation, of course, I wouldn't say that's mostly conservatives objecting to this this policy, which is political grandstanding, no doubt, but it has been pretty equally shared on both sides of the aisle.
Well, what alternatives, if looking at what's happened on the streets in Xinjiang, what alternatives do you think Chinese government has in how it handles the immediate issue of demonstrations?
Well, I think there's several versions of this story that are coming out that have the Chinese forces handling of the initial demonstrations as being the thing that caused it to break out. So you had peaceful demonstrations, and those demonstrations were turned into something not so peaceful when the Chinese security forces got involved. I mean, once people start rioting, yeah, you know, within some restraints, you have to set order straight. But I think you have to look back and see how they started in the first place.
Okay. Let's look at how the Uyghurs started this time. Today, it's disturbing that the Chinese government calling them even terrorists. When this started on Sunday afternoon, I've seen images of the Uyghur youth carrying a Chinese flag. Let me emphasize this very clearly. It takes a lot to make Uyghurs to carry a Chinese red flag. But they did that hoping that they can be protected within the Chinese system. And that speaks volume that they don't have any tendency to turn it into violent incidents. If the government is not overreacting, if the government did not fire shotguns, I think the whole thing could have been avoided. No,
it suggests, but you're saying it takes a lot for a Uyghur to carry a Chinese flag. That suggests that the fracture is very, very deep-seated. I mean, the fact that the Uyghurs feel so strongly about even the idea of carrying a Chinese flag sounds like there's a large gap to be bridged here.
It's an excellent question. There's a reason. Here's the reason why the Uyghurs don't really care about Chinese flag that much. The Uyghurs are deeply spiritual people. They enjoy their spirituality, their cultural values. They think that communism does not go in hand with the Uyghurs' ordinary way of life. So much of it has to do with the Uyghurs don't care much for communism.
Well, I have to stop you there. There's so much more to ask you, and I'm sure we'll revisit this, but I thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Remember, you can find podcasts of our shows on iTunes. This week, you can hear our discussion on US President Barack Obama's upcoming visit to Africa. If you have a question or comment about show topics you'd like us to cover, you can always email us at riz@aljazeera.net. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.